We've got the reciprocal tariffs coming into effect. A lot of people may have kind of like skipped over this, don't want to spend too much time on it, know that it's been obviously making the markets bleed. I mean, we've seen the first quarter of 2025 results, even in the equity markets, almost a 5% drawdown.
People will be wondering like what is going to impact the crypto market. So there's like a few outcomes that we can expect. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Tapping Into Crypto. It's just myself and Pav today, so we're going to talk about all things market.
Just the boys. Two couches.
Man, I don't know what's going on today, but interesting intro there. But Pav, we've got a different kind of episode to our usual sort of crypto catch-up, but what do we got?
I figured the fact that we're going to name drop Trump, I feel like we've got to keep people listening for a bit longer because I'm sure everyone's sick of it.
Oh, mate, I don't think there's been an episode in the last 12 months where we haven't name dropped Trump. But yeah, we promised to give you guys a little fun segment at the end, a little bit more lighthearted, different from what we usually do. So make sure to stick around for that. But we've got some major news coming probably around the same time this episode comes out on Thursday morning.
Actually, yeah.
So we're recording this Tuesday. So I guess you guys will know what the actual outcome of that is. But what is it? It's Liberation Day is what Trump is calling it.
Baby. Yeah.
What does that entail, Pav?
Well, it involves a movie, lots of spaceships, Will Smith.
That's Independence Day,
Oh,
mate.
sorry.
Come on, mate. That's from your era. You should know that.
Yeah, we've got the reciprocal tariffs coming into effect. So a lot of people may have kind of like skipped over this, don't want to spend too much time on it, know that it's been obviously making the markets bleed. I mean, we've seen the first quarter of 2025 results, even in the equity markets, almost a 5% drawdown. The last time we had that was back in 2022 when they were introducing rate hikes and quantitative tightening. The economy was like, it was done. Inflation was too high. So just really let that sink in. Like what we're going through right now isn't just like a small bump in the road. Mm-hmm. But this reciprocal tariffs, it's a big piece, right?
Break it down.
We're going to break
what
down why. So tariffs, essentially at the end of the day, all they are is a tax that's applied by either side of either country. So you got producers and you have consumers. So let's take in this example, the US, largest consumer base in the world. They're using and buying lots and lots of stuff, right? And basically the whole world wants to sell to them. So what Trump is basically saying is, okay, well, if you want us to come and sell to the US, you're going to have to pay us an upfront tax. Basically, that's all it is. It's an entry fee into the greatest consumer base in the world. So tariffs go both ways. It can be paid by the consumer as well as by the producer. So when we're talking reciprocal, Trump and his administration are basically saying, hey, look, what we're paying to you, we just want the same received on our end. So it is, again, at the same time, very debatable on what effect it's going to have long-term in the market. It is going to affect GDP, which is just basically growth across a lot of these countries. Likely will result in increasing inflation over time. Short term, that may not be seen right away or the case. But again, while we don't know what impact it might have, medium, long term is probably going to be good for US manufacturing specifically because it's going to force a lot of things again to come back onshore.
Yeah. Whereas
in the past, a lot of companies may have gone and diverted a lot of their manufacturing offshore, reduced their cost base. As a result, if we look at some of the more macro factors and how they're correlated with, even the markets in crypto, when the US manufacturing sector has seen growth, that has resulted in positive price appreciation for Bitcoin, not because they're tied at the hip and, one equals the other. It's more the economic policy that's enacting when the US manufacturing sector is growing has always benefited Bitcoin in the past. Okay. So there is like that caveat to it as well. So while we know what the short term may not bring, we have seen the impacts of what uncertainty does. We've kind of seen, I guess, the only other recent thing that we've seen that's similar in terms of instability globally, geopolitically, has been, the conflict at Gaza. Mm-hmm. You could even stretch back to as far as Russia-Ukraine kicking off, like that's still going. These sort of events, markets tend to go risk off until there's clarity. Right, and the market needs to get over this date, so then be able for us to sort of look forward and see, okay, well now we know the facts. What's the market going to do next, right? Like, I think that's the exciting bit for us. Like, we've just been in this waiting limbo since the presidency started and this whole tariff thing kicked off in February, start of February.
Yeah. And I suppose like people will be wondering like, okay, but like what is going to impact the crypto market? So there's like a few outcomes that we can expect. So I think the first part is whether they're going to be sweeping or targeted.
Yep.
So targeted is where they're going to target certain countries. I think, what's his name? Scott Bessent, who's the Treasury Secretary, has labelled a certain group of countries the Dirty 15, which is, I don't know about that notorious name, but that would be referring to like the biggest sort of consumers of, or the biggest
producers,
likely
the producers.
Yeah, producers.
They would say that they've got an unfair advantage selling to their users.
Yeah, so like they're benefiting the most from like American imports. So like the Dirty 15, they haven't actually come out with what they are, but you can probably assume it's, countries like China, Mexico, Vietnam, Taiwan, Japan, those sort of countries. But I guess so I think a sweeping reciprocal tariff would be short-term bearish for crypto, but if it's more targeted, we might see some more like upside volatility. And then the other thing is if it's going to be effective immediately or if it's going to, take place in a couple of weeks. I think if it's effective immediately, that's probably short-term bearish for crypto as opposed to like, a set date in a couple of weeks' time, even a month's time. We might see some more upside for crypto, but then obviously that is a very short-term view of it. So they're the two sort of things you want to look at. So targeted versus sweeping, and effective immediately versus, in a couple of weeks' time. So that's what we'll be keeping an eye out for. But what else? Like, how else could this impact the crypto market?
Like everyone talks about global liquidity in M2, right? I mean, there is a slight chance that the US may not need to, print its way out of this current sort of lull that it's in because the rest of the world will be doing more of the heavy lifting for it. So we might find that general indicators that we look to sort of as a precursor to, hey, when this moves, the market moves, those sort of correlations might break. And that's just kind of everyone's job after the fact, kind of look at, what's correlation, what's causation? Like, what have we seen move and shift in the market that's now resulting in risk on assets doing well? And again, we might just see growth globally and not so much in the US, but that's still good for Bitcoin because there's been a very heavy emphasis on the US has to do well for Bitcoin to do well or crypto to do well. So I kind of think, if we look at the facts like China, even Europe, like they're seeing growth, China and specifically seeing too much deflationary activity. So like they need reasons to make more, like to stimulate, right? So if anything, once everyone knows what the chessboard looks like after this, I feel like everyone's going to be more comfortable, hopefully, is what I'm anticipating, essentially providing that liquidity injection to the market. We see lots and lots of stimulus. That helps our markets start to get a bit of movement.
Okay, but you talk about inflation, and inflation is something that we've struggled with for a couple of years now, and while the markets have been, we've essentially had a recession a couple of years ago, and markets have been struggling to perform. Obviously now we've come out of that, but bit uncertain right now. Like, what does short-term inflation that you're sort of saying, how will that impact the markets? Are we going to continue to see like high interest rates, which will therefore mean risk on markets like crypto are gonna suffer?
It's hard to say from here, right? But like definitely, if the cost of goods to consume we're talking again specifically US because these tariffs are for the US consumer, or they'll affect the US consumer at the end. It'll cost them more to access what they want to access, right? So at the end of the day, over time, like their cost base should increase, theoretically speaking. The only offset you could see potentially for inflation is if just other general goods, costs come down. Like, again, this is just waiting for the dust to settle. They keep spruiking about reducing income taxes in the US, which obviously will have an offset against what people are paying for goods in their own country. But we don't know. Like, we just need time, essentially, to understand what it's going to mean. But in the past, like, this is not like a novel thing. It has generally resulted in inflation being more persistent, but it may not be in a major way. I wouldn't say it's going to be any worse. Well, it's hard to say from here again, but like we just went through a huge inflation event, right? Like COVID printed however much percent of the world's money. That's slowly being sort of pulled out through the market, through certain market operations. But I mean, we just went through that, so I can't see it being anything like that.
Yeah, so it's not going to be anything near that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess the main point to take away from that is, as soon as you listen to this, make sure you jump online and see what the actual outcome is of that.
Yep.
Like with Trump, anything's it's always expect the unexpected. So yeah,
and that could be surprise good news too.
Could be. Yeah. Could be.
When by good news, it's him never saying the word tariff again.
So yeah, if you have a risk appetite, you might say, okay, well, I'm expecting, I'm happy to take that risk if I'm expecting some, more targeted tariffs that might take effect, a couple of weeks from now, which might have a positive impact from the market. But yeah, obviously you take on that risk because we don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I think at this point in time, it just sort of like, from a crypto perspective, just sort of showcases how important Bitcoin is in your portfolio, because Bitcoin retains its value so much better than some of those altcoins. So altcoins will obviously outperform Bitcoin in a bull market, but times like this,
conditions,
Bitcoin is just super strong. So
100%.
But yeah, a couple of key news to add on top of that, not really related, but Wyoming. So the US state of Wyoming has actually announced that they're going to launch their own stablecoin. And I was like...
I didn't believe this when you were telling me.
Yeah, I was like, can a state launch their own stablecoin? Like, is it going to be another currency? So I did a bit of digging. It is going to be pegged to the US dollar. It's going to be called what do we got here? WYST. So it's pegged to the US dollar, and they're going to basically collateralize it with cash and US treasuries. So, probably hold assets.
Well, they can make revenue off it then.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the whole idea is to, boost the economy in Wyoming, which, I couldn't imagine is one of the more, like, the largest economies out of the US states.
Ted, you're going to have people in Wyoming just picketing against us.
They're not going to be happy. But it's powered by Layer 0, and it's going to be used across, or usable across Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, and all the ETH Layer 2s.
Interesting.
So I guess, I don't know. Like, I didn't even know that, US states could launch their own stablecoin. I would have thought that's more of a countrywide thing that the US Federal Reserve is sort of in charge of. But
it's interesting. But imagine, like, be cool to see the outcome, right? Because I wonder if that'll have a knock-on effects in other states, even just other places in the world, jurisdictions.
Yeah. I think, and we've discussed before, like, stablecoins in itself have the biggest product market fit in crypto.
Perfect.
And we've seen so many companies coming out with their own stablecoin. We've seen PayPal launch their own stablecoin. We've seen Ripple launch their own stablecoin, even though they have the XRP token, right?
Yep.
And now we're also seeing Fidelity looking to launch their own stablecoin.
Well, it fixes a problem for the issuer and, like, the person that's managing money, let's say like a bank for argument's sake, and then it fixes things for the consumer. Like, it's just costs are reduced on both ends of the scale.
Yeah, and cross-border transactions, faster processing times, lower fees. It makes sense, right? And also, like, they can kind of, generate fees from this, which typically the banks would earn those fees when they're making those transactions. But if it's their stablecoin, they can earn a little bit of extra revenue, or a lot of revenue in that case.
Absolutely. And I think we've said it before on the poddy, like, it'll be the first case where a person could be using crypto but not even know that they're using crypto, right? Like, you don't have to initiate any of those transactions. It's all happening in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, exactly. But it'll be interesting to see sort of what regulations come out about that, because when all these companies and even US states are launching their stablecoins, like, where are the regulators coming in and saying, hey, you actually can't do this. You actually just can't make your own currency and start earning
big time
revenue off that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I know the EU have brought in some pretty stringent stablecoin regulations.
eCash.
What's it called?
They call it eCash.
eCash.
In their legislation. But it's definitely been mapped out there quite nicely so far.
And then the other big story is GameStop has just bought $1.3 billion worth of Bitcoin.
Yeah, see, I saw that story and I was like, do they have much money to buy Bitcoin? Apparently they do.
It's interesting. So it looks like they're going down the MicroStrategy route. For anyone that doesn't know, MicroStrategy was a tech company back in, the early 2000s, founded by Michael Saylor. And obviously they were kind of just like failing away and falling to competitors like Microsoft, Apple, all those, and their stock was just dwindling. And then they thought, okay, well, let's just pivot and buy Bitcoin and basically just put a huge amount of Bitcoin on our balance sheets. And since then, their stock has probably outperformed all of those larger tech companies that it was failing against. But back to GameStop. So yes, essentially last cycle we saw GameStop pump because, it was that short squeeze from like Reddit, wasn't it?
Yeah, meme coin sort of stock movement.
What was the Reddit page called?
Wall Street Bets.
Wall Street Bets, that's right. Yeah, so it kind of did have that meme coin pump where people were just like trying to fight against the hedge funds that were shorting it. And ever since then, I think it's come out of, because it was a failing company, and ever since then it's been profitable.
What's the doco called again?
Oh, Eat the Rich, I think.
Eat the Rich?
Yeah.
It's on Netflix, but worth checking out.
Yeah, absolutely. So the interesting part is, like, you said it, Pav, like, do they even have a $1.3 billion to spend? And I was actually looking at some of their financials, like their balance sheet, income statement, that sort of thing. So back in, a few years ago, they were losing $230 million in, like their earnings. They were reporting negative earnings. Now they're only just profitable, like their EBITDA is like $20 million per year, which is, for a company that's worth $10 billion in market cap, is absolutely nothing. But I think from the fact that they did have that huge pump, and obviously it's become sort of like a meme coin, that sort of saved them and brought them out of that what is it, going into administration zone. So I guess they are kind of turning into that micro strategy where the goal is, they're not going to have brick and mortar stores generating profit for them. They're just going to invest in Bitcoin and sort of go down that route.
Man.
So for comparison, I looked at JB Hi-Fi. JB Hi-Fi, obviously, a store in Australia. They sell tech goods, super popular. Their stock is worth $10 billion, but they...
So it's like if JB Hi-Fi.
Yeah, but they reported $850 million in earnings before, tax and depreciation. So you compare that to GameStop in the US, which is $22 million. It's massive, but obviously GameStop have this whole narrative around it being a meme coin and stuff like that. So that's what's keeping them alive. But we said we'd mention we'd have a little different segment towards the end of the potty. So
yeah, we haven't thought of a good name for this segment, to be honest. We'll Wild and wacky is kind of the feeling. Looking at some of the more comical or colorful stories from crypto's past.
Yeah.
Resurfacing them. A lot of people may have even missed a few of these. We'll try and do one as we come across them. But today I wanted to highlight one that's been dubbed the biggest Bitcoin heist in history. Essentially labeled the big Bitcoin heist in Iceland. Iceland hosts some of the largest Bitcoin mining operations in the world, even still to date. They have really low energy costs, super important when we're talking about Bitcoin mining, which is all about multiple math calculations done as fast as possible. So you want as much computing power as possible to solve those problems, as well as the cool icy air. So that also doubles as a bit of a cooling feature if you're looking to run a mining operation as well. So
because it's obviously using a lot of energy, it becomes very hot.
Yeah, and it's not just Bitcoin mining that's obviously attracted this sort of industrial activity. It's also even data centers. They've popped up as well, have the same problem, power, energy consumption, as well as cooling as well. So and that sort of plays into how this sort of story unfolds as well, which is pretty funny. But basically the heist took place in late 2017, early 2018, and I'll cut to the chase straight away. Basically, the end result, 550 Bitcoin mining rigs and computers and about $2 million worth of equipment stolen.
Yeah.
Was a part of this. So they were stolen from a total of 5 Icelandic data centers. And still to this day, the stolen hardware untraced.
So they didn't actually steal any Bitcoin, which is what we've seen with like hacks in the past, right?
Yeah.
But they actually stole the machinery that prints the Bitcoin.
They stole the ability to print money, as opposed to going for a bank vault full of anything.
Yeah,
that could be potentially traced. Because in this instance, you're minting new Bitcoin technically, so it can't really be found.
Yeah, but I think in this case, like I understand hacking the Bitcoin because you can send it to a wallet halfway across the world, whereas like $2 million worth of equipment is heavy and bulky and easily findable, right? But clearly they haven't been able to find it. So,
well, yeah, I mean, if you dive deeper into the story, the brains behind the operation had definitely like a nefarious past, but he had gone on the straight and road. But doing like some sort of computer degree, he realized that there was this opportunity to go into something like Bitcoin mining, which he understood commercially was an operation that's pretty favorable in Iceland, but the cost to enter obviously quite high. So he kind of worked with a select few group of people going, hey, Iceland is notoriously dubbed as safe, to the point where everyone thinks that nothing could possibly go wrong in Iceland. So to give some sort of perspective, I think in that same year they had in the news article that there'd only been a single murder in the country of Iceland. So just like crime doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And that kind of also paves into, I guess, a lot of how this story unfolds and how these rigs were stolen. But essentially, they used a range of ways to plan out the heist. They basically, like I said, identified 5 data centers. They did have varying degrees of difficulty of this when they scoped them out, like what it would take to break into these centers. Through 2 or 3 of them, the the window was open. And they used a ladder to climb in. I think in one of the cases, the ladder was already there, and they simply just waltzed in, unplugged a whole bunch of computers, took all the spare parts too, and loaded up their van, and off they went. But in one of the instances, it was a much larger, much more professional operation. They basically knew one of the guards on a personal basis, who then the guard then identified them to police later as a part of the prosecution. But they extorted him for all the details, all the routines, all the, where's the magnetic locks that we need to blah, blah, blah. And they basically planned out that theft a lot more in more detail. But long story short, once the break-ins happened, they got all these rigs together. They had stored them. They all tried to flee the country just to sort of cool off before being eventually, I know, right? But they basically made a lot of mistakes along the way. So even though they had sort of escaped the country, CCTV footage was able to identify them, some tattoos from some sleeves when they rolled up and doing some robberies, as well as some clumsiness just on phone messages that they hadn't really deleted. The police were able to piece it together eventually, and there were varying sentences from about 15 months to 4.5 years. Again, computers not really found to this day. They had fessed up to the criminal activities.
That's crazy.
And I think it's interesting.
My thinking is what's stopping anyone from doing that now? Like, there would be huge mining farms across the world. I don't know where the hotspot is now. It might still be in Iceland, or it might be in the US. I know China was a pretty big hub.
Kazakhstan was one. Low cheap power.
Like, do they just have hectic security now, or is it is it traceable? Have they put in
But do you think they've got like a find my iPhone sort of thing?
Yeah, they got air tags on them.
They got air tags on them.
I mean, also as well, like you've got to find a spot to operate them once you've stolen them.
That's right.
Is, you can probably trace that down. Like, here's this place using huge amounts of electricity. That's potentially where they ended up.
100%. And because this made national media in Iceland, where nothing goes wrong, the police left no stone unturned. They were apparently doing raids for months during this whole process to find the stolen hardware. And they were looking at exactly that. They're looking at hotspots on the energy grid. They busted into a whole bunch of data centers, accused a whole range of people. So this was like a very expensive ordeal for the government there.
Yeah, interesting. It reminds me of a story I read on Crypto News Australia where there was a Bitcoin ATM that was stolen, and the guy who owned the Bitcoin ATM posted on Reddit that they'd some thugs stole the ATM and then left it sort of on the side of the street, but luckily none of the Bitcoins inside were stolen. But obviously we know that you actually can't get physical Bitcoins, but who knows if they were just looking for the cash or they thought they could actually find physical Bitcoins. But
to be fair, they probably got a bit unlucky, no cash in there.
Yeah, exactly. So who knows? But just on the mining thing, it's crazy. Like, you hear stories of people who, had a mining operation because it was so cheap to operate back in the day, and it was super profitable. Now it's really the only the huge operations that make money from it. But people could just have a a computer running in their own house,
which they did,
and which they did, and earning what was it, hundreds of Bitcoin every week or something like that. Back when Bitcoin were worth barely anything, and now they're worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I know our developer Lee, a guy at his old job, was asked him, "Hey, do you want to get involved in this Bitcoin mining thing?" Because they're both tech dudes, and Lee thought about it and was like, "Nah, I don't think it's really worth my time." Probably would have been worth close to $1 billion had he done that, but you live and you learn.
You live and you learn.
Poor Lee. Now he even got kicked off the producer role as we got director Dan back in. So
he's still gutted about that.
Yeah, he can't catch a break, old Lethal Lee.
No. But I thought this story in particular is quite I think it is the biggest heist in history when you think about it, because if you stole those rigs in 2017 and they've somehow worked out a way to get them online, even some of them, you could argue maybe they're not as competitive as the newer tech machines, but surely for a couple of years they would have been able to mine effectively-ish and essentially print value, right? It's an interesting concept of going for something that's going to make money.
Well, did you see that that documentary on Netflix that actually talks about it was the biggest heist, I think, in history, not just crypto.
Maple syrup thing?
No. So no, it's crypto.
It's crypto. Oh, sorry.
But like the amount was like something like 500 billion or something because of the amount that was stolen and then the amount that Bitcoin went up to. So like it was a hack on one of the exchanges, and it was this couple that was living, in an apartment in New York, and she had like a YouTube channel, and she was like trying to be a rapper, and she had like all this money to, produce like really sick music videos and have like the best producers and stuff, even though she was terrible. But she was like, her whole life was online. But yeah, then they got raided, and turns out they had like an insane amount of Bitcoin from this exchange hack. I don't actually remember what the exchange it was, but it was a pretty big one.
It's not.
So yeah, it's I'll have to get the name for it and chuck it in the show notes because it's actually a really interesting show. Maybe a few spoilers in there, but yeah, you got to check it out.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what do you reckon? Was that all right?
I like it, mate. I like it. I reckon there's some more interesting stories that we can bring up in future shows because crypto is a wild and wacky universe.
It is.
I'm sure we can do some digging. And there's always that guy who paid like the dump to essentially have a team of people go through it because his wife threw away like the hard drive that had his wallet number. So he was trying to pay the council to go through the whole what is it? The dump? What is it? Yeah. So
nuts.
Crazy. I think he had like something 500 million worth of Bitcoin. Yeah, so there's some horror stories like that. Obviously, you got to write down those keys and not throw away the ledger.
That's it.
Yeah. So we might leave it there.
But if you guys have any stories that you think would be notable, interesting, just leave it as a comment on the YouTube. I think you can do comments on Spotify too now. So let us know. Happy to cover them.
Absolutely.
But other than that, I think we'll see what happens after this tariff debacle's all done.
Yeah, we'll be back next week to unpack it all.
And we promise we won't say tariff again, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully not. Or Trump.
Yeah, or Trump. Well,
Alrighty, guys.
we go.
Thank you.
See ya.
See ya.